Hey, what's going on, guys? Brett's Paradox here, and I'm going to try my hand at a analysis video in my reaction to the Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris Vancouver discussions. The debates are out, guys. They're in the link below. If you haven't found them or watched them already, you need to do that first before listening to my reaction, because they do their ideas justice. I won't do their ideas justice at all. I'm simple-minded, but one thing I am obsessed with the intellectual dark web, and I'm obsessed with the content and the genre that these guys operate in. So that's why I'm doing this analysis video, because I'm obsessed with this stuff. So where to even start? I was thinking there's so many different levels of analysis you can do on these. So I thought I would do it from my perspective. So I've noticed there's the Harris camp, and then there's the Peterson camp, and then there's a group in the middle of people who enjoy both. And I'm in that group in the middle. I like listening to Harris. I like listening to Peterson, to Bret Wienstein, to Rogan. I've listened to all these guys, and when there's a term for the intellectual dark web, that really excited me, because I was like, I'm ensnared in that web for sure. So I thought a good place to start would be how this all came to be. And so Jordan Peterson first made my radar on Sam Harris's podcast. It was a podcast titled What is True? And in that, Sam wanted to have Jordan Peterson on because he was hearing from a lot of his followers that, or subscribers, however you want to look at it, his audience. He was hearing from his audience that this Jordan Peterson guy had an argument for Christianity that a lot of people weren't familiar with. And a lot of the people in Sam Harris's camp didn't know exactly how to interpret it, what sense to make of it, basically. So Sam Harris had Jordan come on, and they discussed the ideas back and forth, but they got really bogged down. And but it was fascinating. It's a fascinating podcast. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it, because I mean, it's thought experiment back and forth, just headbutting. I mean, it's perfect for me, man. That's what I live for. So we had that. A lot of people call it a failed podcast, but I don't think it was failed. Like, sure, they didn't quite come to any kind of resolution that anybody was satisfied with, but it definitely was fascinating. So they did a second podcast together, and it was kind of a lazy attempt at a podcast. Sam just asked basic questions, and Peterson responded, and there wasn't much dialogue. There wasn't that. It felt like neither of them really wanted to be there, and we weren't getting the clearest, best ideas that they were presenting or have presented. Then they both kind of went back doing their own thing. Sam had other people on his podcast. You know, he kept his podcast going. Jordan Peterson ended up making more and more rounds, and he got bigger and bigger, and we started hearing more and more of his ideas get out there. And finally, we were hounding both these guys, hounding Peterson and hounding Harris to do another podcast, because we know that I don't know, people like me who see both sides of this, I feel like there is common ground, that they should be able to converge to some kind of have some kind of convergence that's satisfactory to everybody, because their ideas aren't that different. I don't even think personally that their ideas are mutually exclusive. I think they both could be right on so many different things. Maybe not every point, but certainly on a lot of their points, they're not mutually exclusive. So fast forward to Vancouver, and we get the debates, guys. We get them with Bret Wienstein moderating it. And one thing, and I got my first emotional reaction to these debates right as soon as Bret Wienstein started talking. One thing he's really known for is the concept of metaphorical truth, and that comes up over and over in these Vancouver debates. And I'm just going to cover it real quick, because I love this idea, the concept of metaphorical truth. So a metaphorical truth is something that's literally false, but if you act as if it's true, you come out ahead. So an example of this is a porcupine can throw its quills, and if you tell a child, hey, porcupines can shoot their spikes, don't go near them, the kid's going to stay farther away from the porcupine and get less likely to be stuck by a quill. So that's one example. It's literally false. A porcupine can't actually do that, but if you behave as if it can, you come out ahead. Another example they give in the second debate, and also on Sam Harris's podcast, this one came up, is the idea that treat all guns as if they're loaded. So never point the barrel at somebody. if you're going to hand somebody else a pistol, always remove the mag, cock the slide, check the chamber, make sure there's no round in there. You make sure that gun's not loaded, and you hand it to the other guy, and the other guy does the exact same thing. Because you always want to treat the gun as if it's loaded, because you're going to be less likely to have an accident that way. You're less likely to shoot yourself or somebody you're around if you're super careful, way more careful than you ever should think you'd need to be. And that's a metaphorical truth. It's literally false. The gun's not loaded. The porcupine can't throw its quills. But if you treat it as if they can, or it is loaded, you come out ahead. So that's a metaphorical truth. And this brings me to the point I was going to make. My first giggle, I'm a super nerd, so I'm going to say giggle. My first giggle to these debates was Bret Wienstein opens up the debates and he says to the audience, don't record this conversation. Don't share this conversation online. Don't video record us, because I want Jordan and Sam to be free to discuss their ideas without fear of wide-scale repercussions. Something like that. And I got a real kick out of that, because they know they're being recorded. This is obviously being recorded. I mean, there's cameras on them. There's microphones set up. They're being recorded. But Bret Wienstein, he threw this out there as a metaphorical truth. He wants to get Sam and Jordan to behave as if it's true, even though it's literally false. So here's this guy. He's known for metaphorical truths. He's known for the concept and making the concept kind of much more popular. And here he starts off the debates with a metaphorical truth. That is so Bret Wienstein. He's setting it up. He's setting the intellectual dark web debate up to the extreme. So I was paying real close attention to these debates. I wanted to see if there was any new ideas, any new concepts that we haven't heard them discuss elsewhere. Because we kind of had a sense, we know where Sam and Peterson are both coming from. We know that Sam, he's written The End of Faith, The Moral Landscape. Basically his arguments are that scientific truth can give us the answer to moral questions. So we kind of know where he's coming from. And the Peterson, if you've been following Peterson, we know that he's big on archetypes and on narratives and story, like the value of stories. And you can zone that in a little further to, and this is actually one thing that came out in the Sam Harris podcast, What is True, is that Jordan Peterson has a pragmatic philosophy. And what that is that what has worked best is the only thing that we can know. Like what is true is what's worked best for us so far. And he kind of uses that pragmatic argument to make the case for Christianity and Western culture as a whole. So we have some sense that, Sam's an atheist, though he doesn't think that term should exist. And then Jordan Peterson's kind of arguing for Christianity. So we have these camps, right? But in a sense, there's these camps. And we know their arguments, we know kind of where they're coming from. So the question was, what were we going to get in these debates? And so I was paying real close attention. Are we going to get any new ideas, or are we just going to see the same old arguments hashed out against each other? And it starts off, I really like how they started off. Jordan Peterson kind of outlines where they agree until they wade into waters that they disagree. And I like that idea, because they even kind of did that in the What is True podcast, but that didn't work out so well in that one. But I think you could tell that Jordan Peterson really did his homework on Sam's The Moral Landscape, because basically the moral landscape is exactly how he outlined it. There's these two catastrophes you want to avoid, and then you want to ground your value structure, your ethics, into something solid. And Sam chooses scientific fact. So they kind of agree about avoiding the catastrophes. Where they disagree is how to base your ethical system, your values, how you should orient and operate in the world. And so we kind of get the same. So they wade into waters where they disagree, and we start to get the same arguments we've heard against both people. The arguments against the fundamentalist dogma that's in the it's okay to take slaves. There's things in the Bible that you can point to. And one thing that I really enjoyed in this debate is hearing them come up with real-time arguments and counterpoints. And I was fascinated, because in some sense I wouldn't have any idea how you would argue against a straightforward sentence in the Bible. But Jordan Peterson, he pulls out I think it's pretty creative. Like, you can disagree with his argument, but you got to admit that it was creative to come up with the idea that you have to contextualize every sentence in the Bible, every sentence in the paragraph, every paragraph in the book, and then every book in the Bible. And you can't read any sentence without viewing it in context of the whole. And now he does this is where it gets kind of tough to follow Peterson, is what exactly he was arguing for, because it didn't seem like he was trying to say that, and this is where it starts to get over my head at some point. I've listened to it so many times, and I still can't regurgitate these arguments with much common sense. But the one sense that I did get, and I'm curious if you guys agree or disagree with this, let me know and give me some evidence, guys, because I've been trying to figure this out. Is Jordan Peterson, does he actually believe that there is this counter narrative running through the Bible to dismiss these earlier sentences, or is he just sort of because one thing that we know that Jordan Peterson said going into these debates is that Sam Harris doesn't take the Bible and he doesn't take religion seriously, and he's very dismissive of it. So one thing that I was thinking is Jordan Peterson probably can't give up too many of these. He doesn't want to concede too many of the little points. And my laundry's done. He doesn't want to concede too many little points to Sam, because otherwise it's going to sort of undermine his whole argument for Christianity. And he's arguing pragmatically too. We got to take that into account, that what is true is what's worked best. And it's sort of like the metaphorical truth idea. It's even if it's literally false, if you come out ahead as if you believe it, it's true enough. And that's the argument that Peterson was making in the What is True podcast. So in some sense, it's where it gets really tough to wrap, at least me, it gets tough for me to wrap my head around just how serious these points are that he's raising, and how much weight to give to the because you do start to fall prey to the postmodernist viewpoints that there's an infinite way to interpret a text. There's no right or wrong way. So where do you draw the line between what's obvious and what's very literal interpretation, and then the extracted out story beneath the literal obvious interpretation? So it definitely. And another thing I think you got to give to Jordan Peterson is he's real creative in if anybody's listened to his biblical lecture series, I highly recommend it, because it's truly unbelievable the depth of analysis that he pulls. He pulls things from the Bible that I'm not even sure the Bible knows is that deep. And it's awesome, guys. So definitely recommend his psychological analysis of the biblical lectures. Something I totally believe that, but that's the fundamental, Google that, biblical psychology of psychological analysis of the biblical stories. I think that's what it's titled. So yeah, I kept waiting for new things to come out, and that was kind of we haven't heard Jordan Peterson necessarily defend, what's the term for that? Defend, not defend the Bible, but defend an interpretation of the Bible. We haven't heard so much that. So that was kind of new. We haven't heard so much that perspective. We did get to hear some criticism of Sam's ideas. We heard the Hume's distinction of an is and an ought, but that's not new. We've heard Sean Carroll argue against Sam, and if you want to know, I think it's one of the better arguments against Sam's moral landscape is the Hume's distinction, but I also don't think that Sam's wrong. I think maybe we should just ignore Hume's an is from an ought or an ought from an is argument, because I took an epistemology class and it drove me insane, because what I came away from that is we can never actually know anything to 100%. And you can easily go down straight to nihilism by taking an epistemology class and just get completely confused about how to orient yourself in the world. And it's not helpful. And I think Hume's argument isn't very helpful. So I don't criticized Sam for dismissing it, and I don't even think Peterson criticizes Sam for dismissing it, but Peterson definitely brought up the argument against Sam a couple of times throughout the debates. So I was kind of fascinated by that. I'm guessing that it was just more a debate tactic than it was a search for any deeper knowledge. And we got to keep in mind that these two do have egos, even though they somewhat claim to not be too carried by their egos. I mean, you got Sam, who does a lot of meditation, but he definitely has an ego, and you can get the sense of his ego and being kind of annoyed in these debates. And the same thing with Peterson. Like, you can tell he clearly doesn't want to come out the loser of this debate. So he does argue points that he maybe doesn't, like, he was arguing things that he doesn't even necessarily disagree with Sam with on. So I was kind of fascinated by that, but I don't really, again, I'm not the type that, I don't really care. I just want to get a good debate and a good discussion, and these criticisms of each other's ideas are legitimate criticisms. So to hear them argued, even if the person arguing it doesn't necessarily believe that that's how you undermine the other's argument, I'm fine with hearing it. And so they go back and forth, back and forth. One of the parts of the debate that I really enjoyed was when Sam was really pressuring Jordan into giving a definition for God and to really just say what exactly you believe. It doesn't take 40 hours to talk about the resurrection of Jesus. There's got to be a quicker answer, surely you can give me a yes or no, do you think Jesus was resurrected? Of course, Jordan Peterson sticks with it. It's complicated, but I was super fascinated when Jordan Peterson laid out his definition of God. He did it in a series of propositions, and each one of those propositions I thought was really fascinating. And in some sense, you can see like maybe there is a scientific explanation that perfectly explains what God is. So that's, again, another argument that I don't think their ideas are mutually exclusive. But I was fascinated by Jordan Peterson's definition of God because, and I think Bret Wienstein even said this, is you don't have to believe in anything supernatural to adopt that definition of God. And I think that Jordan Peterson's pretty careful. I've never heard him say specifically that there is anything supernatural about his beliefs in Christianity. Though, some people have said, well, you can go back and forth on that. I don't know. I'm curious what do you guys think? Does he believe in a supernatural God, or is this sort of the way he defines it isn't a supernatural? Like, you don't have to believe anything supernatural to believe, at least I don't think you do, to believe in the proposition that he laid out. And you could tell Sam was getting kind of frustrated because Sam wants a clean answer. I mean, if you read Sam's work, it's all crisp, it's all clean, it's easy to follow, it's very logical and rational. And Peterson, he does a lot of metaphor and a lot of, it's a lot of storytelling, basically. So, but I was fascinated by his definition of God, because that is a definition of God I think Christians would agree with, and I think atheists, if you're defining that as God, I think even most atheists could go for that. So, I was pretty pumped when he threw out those definitions, because in some sense that is, I think, what the deepest version if you're thinking about God as a spaghetti monster, that's pretty shallow thinking. Even if you read the Bible, you could, Jordan Peterson's description of God could perfectly describe the God in the Bible, or I wouldn't fault anybody for reading the Bible and then saying that this God's supernatural and clearly can't exist in the world. So, I think it's fun to hear these ideas, at least, and to try and make sense of them. That's one thing that I love about these guys, is try to wrap your mind around what they're talking about in real time, and then try to come up with the argument that the other's going to make to counteract the argument, the counter arguments. It's all fascinating to me. Though I have been told that I'm simple-minded, and I think that's generous. But one thing that I can say about me is I'm also determined to understand what they're talking about. So I've listened to some of their podcasts 5, 6, 7 times. And I'm sure I'll do the same with this one. I've listened to it multiple times already, and I still don't understand everything. So I've got to go back and listen to it again and again and again. And I've been going back and I've been re-listening to a lot of Sam's and Peterson's older podcasts. and one that I really recommend that I think it's in some ways it's more clear than the arguments between Jordan and Sam is the interview with Sam and Sean Carroll, the scientist. And I think he's a physicist, probably a physicist. I've caught him on Rogan a few times too, but it's a really good podcast because I think that one you can really get to the. It's in my mind, a more articulate criticism against Sam's book, and I think Sam gives a really good articulate response to that criticism. So I think if you want to get at least through the Hume's distinction and then the arguments of free will, that Sean Carroll one's a really good one because you get to see the best of Sam's argument and the best of the argument against Sam's. Yeah, so that's where they end kind of the first debate with, and then the second one picks up. They bring up this idea of metaphorical truth, and in a lot of sense, you can get the. Actually, one more thing they ended in that first debate with that I was fascinated is Jordan Peterson said, "I never said I believe in God. I said I act as if He exists," and to me that was like the bold text, super font, italicized, underline. Like to me that just rang a bell. It's like, okay, so he was real specific with that. I'm not saying that God exists. I'm saying I act as if He exists. Something along those lines. So I think to me that really rang home. Like, okay, so that again, that's pragmatic philosophy. That's a pragmatic argument. Jordan Peterson's a pragmatist, and so he's definitely making the case that, and that's a metaphorical truth also. So that's where they start off the second debate with the idea of metaphorical truth. Then they kind of butt heads, and it's a lot of it stuff we've heard them argue back and forth before. Maybe not Jordan and Sam, but we've heard them make these arguments before. So nothing too groundbreaking, but you definitely get to hear their brilliance and their real-time arguments and counter-arguments against each other. There are so many times that if I was in either one of their shoes, even knowing that pretty much everything they've said before, I would have been stumped. I wouldn't have came up with what to say until that night. I would have been laying in bed and I would have been like, oh, why didn't I think of that during the debates? So they definitely have way more intelligence than I do, and so I enjoy listening to them for that reason also. But yeah, where was I going with that? Yeah, simple-minded, right, guys? So I'm just going to fast forward, and I think the real MVP of these debates is Bret Wienstein. To me, every time he spoke, things became more clear, and you could sort of see the differences between Sam and Peterson kind of emerge in Bret Wienstein. And it seemed like his concept of metaphorical truth pretty much perfectly explains these debates between Sam and Jordan. Sam definitely thinks that the truth in metaphor, like any story, that anything that we can derive from a metaphorical truth could be true without the literally false component of it. Like we can take the truth from that metaphorical truth and then live in the world with that truth and be just fine if we're, taking into account everything. Whereas Jordan isn't willing to say, hey, but what are we missing if we throw out the metaphorical truth? What are we missing if we throw these stories out? If we just discard these stories completely, what thing are we going to be throwing out? Are we going to throw out a piece of the baby with the bathwater? A piece of the baby? Like, we're going to rip off the baby's leg and throw it out with the bathwater? We don't want to do that, guys. We want the baby intact, and we just want to throw out the bathwater. So, I was fascinated by the debates. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. I'm curious who you think made the better argument, or at least came across better during the debates. Where you think each one kind of went wrong. I'm really curious what you guys think, because I'm still trying to figure it out. I've probably changed my opinions. I'm sure every day this week I'll change my opinion on something. And one thing I'll say too that I really liked is the first time I watched the debates, I was focused more on Jordan Peterson's perspective, because I pretty much knew the points that Sam was going to argue, because I've read all his books and I listen to his podcast all the time. And I've heard all the criticisms of Sam, and I've heard his responses to the criticism. So I was much more focused on Peterson. What's Peterson going to say? What's Peterson going to argue? And I've listened to all Peterson stuff too, but I'm just curious in the context of Sam, what he was going to be arguing and how he was going to articulate it. So I was much more focused on Peterson, and I noticed when you focus in on Peterson, at least after the first debate, I thought, wow, Peterson he came off really well in that first debate. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to watch it again and pay more attention to Sam. And when I did that, it felt like Sam came out way better. So I can see how both camps thought that, both Jordan and Sam camps thought that their hero came out ahead. Maybe that's not the right term. Maybe hero's not right. But so I definitely understand how, if you're listening to it, focusing your words on more on one person, it's easy to see their arguments and their it's like, and one thing I noticed too is I kept drifting out while the other person, so in the first time I was listening, I kept drifting out while Sam was speaking, trying to figure out what Jordan was saying. Because my brain, there's like a 30-second lag time. So by the time Sam was done talking, Jordan had already started talking again. So it's easy to, you guys are probably smarter than me, so you guys probably didn't have that problem, but I had that problem. So I definitely think, after listening to it a couple of times, I think they both did a really good job. I don't think either of them made any mistakes. Like they might have made small little mistakes, but I don't think anybody misrepresented their ideas or made any, there was no gaping holes in either their arguments or anything that I could see. At least compared to the arguments they've made in the past. They didn't just totally mess up for the debates or anything. So I think they both did good. And again, I think Wienstein did the best, to be honest. Every time he spoke, I found myself like, yeah, I think Bret Wienstein's a genius. It might just be he has a cool name, and I kind of attach myself to his name. So I don't know, but one thing I did like too, I was reading some of the comments on the videos, and people want to start a GoFundMe for Bret Wienstein's hair, like to get him a haircut. But I personally love his hair, man. I think it's pretty sweet. Like there's something like so unique about it that you can just tell, like, that guy, there's something different about that guy. So if we're funding this haircut, man, hopefully it's nothing too crazy. I don't want to see him, come with a buzz cut or something. I want him to have that crazy mop on top of his head. So there's my analysis and reaction, guys. Let me know what you think. I'm going to try to do more of these. Probably not for just Sam and Jordan, but I'd like to do just all intellectual dark web content. I'd like to try to discuss my ideas. Because one thing I've noticed is when I make videos, I start to understand the concept, the subject matter way more than I did before. And I was thinking about this, like, why is that? And it was almost like in high school. I don't know if you guys remember, like, if you ever had a question on if you ever had a math question that you couldn't solve, and you'd raise your hand and say, hey, teacher, I need help. I'm an idiot. And the teacher would come over and you'd start explaining the problem, where you think you're going wrong. And then all of a sudden, it clicks on how to solve the problem. And I get that all the time in my videos. Like, I'll be talking about something, like, not really sure how this is going to work out, and then all of a sudden the answer just comes to me. Something about vocalizing and trying to articulate. You have to have it to articulate something. You have to kind of figure it out to articulate it in a proper, in a sense that makes any sense to anybody. So so that's one reason I made this video too, is try to help get my mind around my thoughts on the debates, because there's so many different ways to look at these debates. Like I tried to make a video all yesterday on this, and I was trying to make it more an analysis of the arguments they were making, and I realized, like, man, I'm just not smart enough to regurgitate what these two were talking about. If you're really curious more the specific arguments, the first 10 minutes of the second Vancouver debate, they steelman each other's arguments, and to me that's like the perfect representation. They both did a fantastic job, and that's like intellectual dark web at its finest. You try to steelman the other person's argument, and then you try to find the fault. You try to find where their argument's wrong, where the best version of their argument is wrong, and not just do the cheap, easy attacks. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything that I really wanted to mention. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Hope you guys are doing good. Hope you guys are taking it easy, having a good weekend. And check in later, guys. Hope you guys are doing good. I'm out of here. See ya.